plateau outside of Cairo. And that is where you have sort of the Great Pyramid of Khufu and Khafre. And what's important about that is that it's the only wonder of the ancient world that's still around, and it's just an unbelievable masterpiece of engineering by any standard, doesn't matter, ancient or modern. It was not built by slaves, at least it doesn't appear that way. It was the people of Egypt, and it was a way to keep them employed. And we have evidence of their sort of work camps and kitchen areas, and they were well fed. So these were not slaves. I mean, think about it. Why would you employ slaves to build something so complex that has to be done perfectly, or the whole thing will be screwed up? A slave probably doesn't care to try and do a good job. They're just going to do the least amount possible. So it doesn't even really make too much sense. And it also doesn't make sense to suggest that aliens or whatever built the pyramids or they told other human beings how to build them and forced the humans to build them, or whatever the theory may be. Because why would they have made a mistake and had a bent pyramid? And why would there have been a step pyramid? And why would they not use metal? I mean, there's plenty of reasons why that doesn't really make any sense. But anyhow, the Great Pyramid of Khufu is fascinating. So when you go inside, you move up the Grand Gallery, as it's called, towards the King's Chamber. And then as you enter the King's Chamber, there's these presumed to be air vents. And then people have now suggested they're astronomically aligned, and it was a way of helping the pharaoh's Ka, or his Ba, parts of his soul, of the makeup of who he is, to unite with certain stars and constellations. And that's possible, but then there's also what were thought to be air vents coming out of the Queen's Chamber, as it's called, which is beneath the King's Chamber, and those vents don't actually even exit to the outside of the pyramid. And we have sent robots up through some of these shafts, and it's been fascinating because they have found a false door with these copper handles on them, and they managed to drill through one of them and put a little sort of miniature camera in it. And inside, they actually found that there's another false door behind it, but they found some graffiti from some workmen. And who knows what is in that room and then what's beyond in the next room. So there's still mysteries of the pyramid that we have not figured out as of, what is it now, February of 2012. So maybe we'll, in the next few years, actually have some updates on that. But the mysteries of the pyramids still persist. But it should be noted that a lot of things that seem mysterious about it aren't really too mysterious anymore. Just the structure itself. The fact that you have that shape of a pyramid is symbolically important for the ancient Egyptians. If you look at their creation stories, so from the Heliopolitan creation myth, one of three major creation accounts in ancient Egypt, you have this idea of order coming out of a chaotic water at the beginning of time. And so a mound of earth sort of rises up out of this chaotic water, and it's in sort of a pyramid type shape. And they have something known as the Bin Bin stone in Heliopolis in ancient Egypt. And this pyramid-shaped stone is associated with creation and with life and regeneration. So the shape itself of a pyramid is fundamentally tied to the creation myths of the ancient Egyptians. Which is why, yes, the pyramids are probably some sort of resurrection, ritual, symbolic resurrection machine for the deceased pharaoh. But that doesn't mean that it's a machine in the sense that we would think of that today. with a bunch of different moving parts or something like that. It's all about the symbolism of it. So the pyramids are still built well beyond the Great Pyramids, and eventually they get smaller and smaller because they're expensive and they don't really have the money. And they also start to put hieroglyphs on the walls. So you don't really have any text on the walls in the Great Pyramid. There's very little. There's some graffiti and supposedly a small cartouche that says Khufu, but that's about it. But later, in like the 5th, 6th dynasties, you have pyramids with a bunch of text on the wall. And that's very important, because the pyramid texts are actually the earliest religious texts that we have. Far earlier than any sort of written account of the Rig Veda in India. Way earlier. So we're talking like 2500 BCE for the pyramid texts, and maybe like 1300 BCE for something like the Rig Veda. So, very important as far as the history of religion is concerned. And go on and on about the pyramids, but one other thing to note is that not only are the pyramids interesting and critically important, what is surrounding and right outside of the pyramids is equally important. So outside of the Great Pyramid, we found this amazing boat. I mean, it was in pieces, but they've reconstructed this thing. And it's a huge boat that is supposed to take the deceased pharaoh across the sky. Because remember, above the sky, if you look at my 3-story universe video, there was this belief in the ancient world of this 3-story universe, or 3-story cosmology. So you have Earth floating on a disk, either floating in water, floating on air, something like that. An underworld, so the subterranean realm, where the deceased would sometimes be, but then some select people would make it up into the sky, which was held up by a dome, and then there's fresh water above it. And so the pharaoh was believed to go with certain gods, like Ra, Re, and travel across the sky after he died. So we found boats outside of the pyramids. We found their funerary temples right in front of the pyramid. Then there's a causeway, sort of like a walkway, leading to a valley temple. So there's a lot more going on that you don't really see nowadays. You just see the pyramids for the most part. And you do see one other thing that is apparent on the horizon by the pyramids, and that is the Sphinx. So the Sphinx has been a source of just as much mystery and confusion as the pyramids, if not more. To be completely honest, we don't know who built it. Egyptologists are going to tell you that it's most likely built by Khafre, so it's going to be Khufu's son who built this. But there's plenty of evidence to suggest that he actually did not build it, and it was already there when he was building his pyramid. So it's really not definitive as to who built this, whether it's from 2500 BCE, which is roughly the standard date, okay, for the Sphinx. Other people have made wild speculations, like that it goes back to 10,000 BCE, and that there's evidence from geology, from where it's cut out from the cliff side right next to the Sphinx. There's evidence of erosion that's so extreme that there's no way it could only be 4,500 years old. It's got to be more like 10,000 plus years old. But then people have countered that evidence, so there's a back and forth between some geologists and other geologists, between some geologists and Egyptologists, and so there really isn't a clear account. In fact, we don't even know exactly what the Sphinx looked like. It had a beard at one time, but we've now proven that the beard was not original. It also was painted. There's still some eye paint remaining. And that's something worth noting about ancient Egyptian monuments in general. You go to Egypt nowadays and everything is sort of this tan, beige, roughly the same color as the sand in the desert around the monuments. But if you were there back in ancient Egypt, it would have looked completely different. Even the pyramids are going to have casing stones, and the sphinx is going to have paint all over it. The temples are going to have paint all around them. So it would have been a very colorful place, and it would have been a totally different experience. It almost might have seemed tacky in some ways to our aesthetic sensibilities now, but that's worth pointing out, that it would have been quite a different scene if you were there 4,000 years ago. But the Sphinx, the riddle that it is something that is still going to probably dominate the minds of plenty of Egyptologists, and it ties in with, once again, mythology, Egyptian mythology, and it has been renovated or restored multiple times now. It was even restored back in antiquity. So it is very old, and we don't really know too much about it. But once again, just like with the pyramids, I think that in the next 3 to 5 years, there actually could be some new evidence to shed light on its origin.